I thought my team sergeant was paranoid. Maybe even a little crazy. While every other Green Beret instructor was teaching us advanced tactics and high-tech warfare, he was obsessed with teaching us skills that belonged in the Stone Age. I questioned him. I challenged him. I thought he was wasting our time. Then came the day in Afghanistan when everything I trusted, every piece of modern equipment, every technological advantage, every sophisticated weapon system, failed me all at once. Alone. Hunted. 72 hours from safety. And the only thing standing between me and death were 5 items I'd carried for years but never believed I'd actually need. The same 5 items he'd forced me to carry despite my protests. That day, I learned the hardest lesson of my life. Sometimes the people who seem stuck in the past are the only ones who can save your future. A former Green Beret sits before the camera, his withered face bearing scars that tell stories most people will never hear. Behind him, the sun sets over a devastated landscape, crumbling buildings, skeletal structures, the kind of war zone that exists in the darkest corners of the world. His hands rest on a small tactical pouch, worn and faded, the fabric stained with dirt and dried blood from a mission he's never discussed publicly until now. "This pouch saved my life," he says quietly, his fingers tracing the edges. "Not because of what's inside, 5 simple items that cost less than $100 total. It saved me because of what it represented, lessons I didn't want to learn from a man I didn't want to listen to." He pauses, his eyes distant, seeing something beyond the camera. Something that happened years ago in the mountains of Afghanistan. Something that transformed him from a confident special operator who trusted satellites and encrypted communications into a humbled survivor who learned that the oldest skills are sometimes the only ones that matter. "I'm going to tell you what's in this pouch," he continues, "and more importantly, I'm going to tell you why I almost died refusing to believe these 5 things could ever matter. Because the story of how I survived isn't about heroism or tactical brilliance. It's about being wrong. Dangerously, almost fatally wrong. And having to learn, in the worst possible way, that sometimes the teacher you resist the most is teaching you the only lesson that will keep you breathing." He opens the pouch slowly, deliberately. "These 5 items kept me alive for 3 days behind enemy lines when everything else failed. But before I show you what they are, you need to understand why I almost didn't have them at all. You need to hear about the man who forced me to carry them, the training I thought was worthless, and the moment when my arrogance nearly became my gravestone." The camera holds on his face, intense, haunted, grateful, as the sunset behind him fades to darkness, mirroring the story he's about to tell. He reaches into the pouch with deliberate slowness, as if touching something sacred. The first item emerges, a fixed-blade tactical knife, its edge worn but meticulously maintained. He turns it over in his hands, and there's something almost reverent in the gesture. "This isn't a fighting knife," he says, his voice quiet but certain. "I mean, it can be used for that, but that's not why it saved me. This blade became my hands when my hands weren't enough. It processed materials, created tools, prepared kindling, cut paracord, carved stakes. In 3 days, I used this knife for probably 50 different tasks. Not once was combat one of them." He sets it down carefully and pulls out the second item, a ferro rod fire starter, blackened from use, smaller than a pen but dense with purpose. No fuel. No batteries. No moving parts to break. You scrape it, you get sparks. You get sparks, you get fire. You get fire, you survive freezing mountain nights without giving away your position with smoke from a large fire. Simple. Primitive. Unbreakable. The third item is a small packet of tablets, the packaging faded and creased. He holds it up to the camera. Water purification tablets. They look insignificant, don't they? Like something you'd throw in a first aid kit and forget about. But contaminated water doesn't care how tough you are or how well trained. It'll kill you just as dead as a bullet, just takes longer and hurts more. These tablets turned filthy stream water into something my body could use instead of something that would destroy me from the inside. Item 4 catches the dying sunlight as he produces it, a signal mirror, compact and scratched from years of carry. I used this to check corners without exposing myself. To mark routes I'd traveled. To signal a patrol aircraft on the third day when I thought I'd never see home again. It's just a piece of reflective metal, but it became eyes when I needed to see, and a voice when I couldn't speak. Finally, he pulls out a bundle of olive green cord, precisely 50 feet of 550 paracord, coiled tight. This, he says, and for the first time there's something like wonder in his voice, this has literally hundreds of uses. I secured gear. Created noise traps around my hiding positions. Fashioned shelters. Repaired boots. Made snares. This cord was my duct tape, my rope, my wire, my lifeline. He arranges all 5 items in front of him: knife, fire starter, purification tablets, signal mirror, paracord. Together they look almost laughably simple against the backdrop of modern warfare's complexity. When every piece of modern equipment fails, he says, his eyes moving across each item, you survive with what humans have survived with for millennia. These 5 things, they're not mine. I didn't choose them. I didn't want to carry them. He pauses, and something raw crosses his face. My team sergeant mandated them. Made it non-negotiable. And I resented him for it. Questioned him. Thought he was wasting our time preparing for scenarios that would never happen. His hand rests on the knife again. Then the scenario happened. And these 5 items were all that stood between me and a grave in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Team Sergeant Mark was a legend before this operator ever met him. 3 decades of Special Forces operations, deployments to conflicts most people had never heard of, scars that mapped a career spent in the darkest corners of the world. He had the respect that comes from surviving what kills other men. But he also had a reputation that made younger operators roll their eyes. Mark was obsessed, the Green Beret says, and there's still a trace of his old frustration in his voice. While every other team sergeant was teaching advanced tactics, modern weapon systems, integrated technology, Mark was teaching us to start fires with friction. To navigate by stars. To make tools from rocks and sticks. Primitive survival techniques that seemed like they belonged in a museum, not in a Tier 1 Special Forces unit. The disconnect was jarring. Green Berets training with million-dollar equipment, learning to coordinate drone strikes and encrypted communications, and then spending entire days rubbing sticks together trying to create embers. The team's frustration grew with each session. We're Tier 1 operators with the most advanced capabilities on the planet, one teammate complained during a particularly grueling bow drill fire exercise, and he's got us out here playing caveman. The operator shared the sentiment completely. I thought it was a complete waste of valuable training time, he admits. We had limited hours to master everything we needed to know, and Mark was burning through them teaching skills that felt prehistoric. We weren't hunters and gatherers. We were elite special operators. The disconnect seemed absurd. But Mark was immovable. He'd stand there, weathered and calm, watching them struggle with techniques that predated civilization, and he'd repeat the same warnings. Technology breaks. Batteries die. Satellites fail. Communications get jammed. His voice was always measured, never defensive. When that happens, and it will happen, what keeps you breathing when the modern world stops working? The team heard the words but didn't absorb them. They were young, confident, equipped with gear that seemed infallible. The scenarios Mark described felt theoretical, the paranoid fantasies of an old soldier who'd spent too long in the field. He made it mandatory, the operator continues. Every single operator under his command had to carry a survival pouch. Not suggested. Not recommended. Mandatory. 5 specific items: the knife, fire starter, purification tablets, signal mirror, paracord. He'd do random inspections. If you didn't have that pouch on your belt, you'd face consequences. No exceptions, no excuses. The team viewed it as Mark's eccentricity, the price of training under a living legend who was maybe a little too scarred by old wars. They carried the pouches because they had to, not because they believed in them. The items felt like deadweight, relics from a different era of warfare that modern technology had made obsolete. Looking back now, he says quietly, Mark wasn't out of step with modern warfare. He understood something we didn't. He'd seen what happens when the technology fails, when the modern advantages evaporate, when sophisticated equipment becomes worthless metal. He was trying to prepare us for the moment we were absolutely certain would never come. His hands tightened slightly. The moment that came for me in the mountains of Afghanistan. Before we follow him into those mountains, before we see how catastrophically wrong he was about Mark's training, I want to ask you something. Have you ever ignored advice that later saved your life? Or dismissed a teacher whose lessons turned out to be invaluable? Drop a comment below and share your story, because what you're about to witness isn't just about survival gear. It's about the deadly cost of arrogance and the life-saving value of humility. If you want to see how 5 items that cost less than $100 kept a Green Beret alive when $1 million of equipment failed, hit that subscribe button now. Because the next 72 hours will change everything he thought he knew about survival. The training rotations were brutal by design: mountains, deserts, environments that stripped away comfort and tested every capability an operator possessed. He excelled in all the domains that mattered. Tactical operations, advanced weapons handling, technology integration, coordinated team movements. He was good at his job, and he knew it. The modern aspects of special forces operations came naturally to him. But then came the week that broke his patience. 7 days focused almost entirely on primitive survival exercises. Bow drill fire starting. Natural navigation using celestial markers. Improvised tool creation. Hour after hour of techniques that felt increasingly disconnected from the reality of modern warfare. I reached my breaking point, he says, the memory still sharp. We'd spent an entire day practicing bow drill fire starting. My hands were blistered. My patience was gone. I pulled Mark aside. The confrontation was direct. He didn't hide his frustration anymore. Team Sergeant, with all due respect, when exactly are we going to need these skills? We have GPS navigation accurate to 3 meters. We have encrypted satellite communications with instant global reach. We have air support that can be overhead in minutes. His voice carried the edge of someone stating what seemed like obvious truth. If I'm ever in a situation where I need to start a fire with a bow drill or navigate by stars, that means the entire mission has already failed catastrophically and we should probably just be focusing on extraction. The rest of the team stood nearby, not saying anything but clearly agreeing. Modern special forces operations had evolved. They operated with technological superiority that made primitive skills feel like historical curiosities. He was just saying what everyone else was thinking. Mark listened without interrupting. When the operator finished, there was a long silence. The team sergeant's weathered face showed no anger, no defensiveness. Just that same calm certainty he always carried. "Captain," Mark finally said, his voice measured and firm, the day you realize you're completely wrong about this is the day these exact skills will save your life. Until that day comes, and it will come, you'll keep training them whether you believe in them or not. It wasn't up for debate. Mark turned and walked back to the training area, leaving the operator standing there with his frustration unresolved. I resented him for it, he admits now. Hundreds of hours spent on what I considered obsolete survival skills. Hours that could have been used for tactical training, weapons qualifications, mission rehearsals. Real skills for real combat. I went through the motions after that, lighting fires, tying knots, memorizing star positions, but I was just checking boxes. I didn't believe in any of it. The resentment followed him all the way to deployment. Mark's training had become something to endure rather than embrace, a quirk of an old soldier who couldn't let go of the past. Before he left for Afghanistan, Mark found him one final time. The team sergeant's hand rested briefly on the survival pouch hanging from the operator's belt. Keep this on you. Check it every single day. Mark's eyes held something he couldn't quite read then, maybe urgency, maybe certainty. Your life will depend on what's inside it. He nodded, the gesture automatic, the words barely registering. He was already thinking about the mission ahead, about the sophisticated equipment they'd be carrying, about the technological advantages that would keep them safe. The survival pouch hung on his belt like an afterthought, mandated weight he carried because he had to, not because he believed he'd ever actually need it. Afghanistan's mountain region stretched before them like the edge of the world, ancient, unforgiving, controlled by an enemy that knew every cave and trail like the lines on their own hands. The Hindu Kush mountains held secrets older than warfare itself, and the Taliban had made these peaks their fortress. The team inserted under darkness, 6 highly trained Green Berets equipped with everything modern military technology could provide. Encrypted communications systems that couldn't be intercepted. Thermal optical devices that turned night into day. GPS navigation accurate to the meter. Night vision equipment that made them apex predators in the dark. Weapons systems that represented decades of engineering excellence. The mission was deep reconnaissance, he explains. Taliban-controlled mountain passes. We needed intelligence on enemy movements, positions, supply routes. Get in, observe, gather data, get out. Clean and surgical. The confidence was quiet but absolute. 6 operators who'd trained together for years, each one a specialist, each one capable of independent operation if needed. Detailed extraction plans. Air support on standby. Contingencies for every scenario they could imagine. This was what modern special forces operations looked like, precision backed by overwhelming technological advantage. The initial phases went exactly as planned. The team moved through enemy territory like ghosts, avoiding contact, gathering intelligence, and communicating in brief encrypted bursts that enemy forces couldn't detect or decode. They owned the night. They owned the information space. They operated with a level of sophistication that made traditional combat feel primitive by comparison. This is modern warfare, he remembers thinking during the 3rd day. Precision. Overwhelming information advantage. Complete communications dominance. We were operating in their backyard, and they didn't even know we existed. The mountain landscape was stunning in its hostility, sheer cliff faces, narrow passes where ambushes seemed impossible to avoid, elevations that made every breath a conscious effort. But the technology compensated for the terrain's brutality. GPS showed them safe routes. Thermal optics revealed enemy positions before visual contact. Satellite communications kept them connected to a support network that spanned continents. The survival pouch hung on his belt, its presence so routine he'd stopped noticing it. Amid all the sophisticated equipment, the encrypted radio, the advanced rifle optics, the GPS unit, the night vision, those 5 primitive items felt like archaeological remnants. He carried them because Mark had mandated it, but his trust rested entirely on the modern gear surrounding him. The 4th day brought them deeper into hostile territory. The mission was proceeding ahead of schedule. Intelligence gathered. No compromise. No contact with enemy forces. Everything is running like clockwork. Base, this is Sierra 2-1, he transmitted during the final scheduled check-in. Position secure. Continuing mission as planned. Will maintain radio silence until the extraction window. How copy? Sierra 2-1, solid copy. You're clear for continued ops. Air support standing by. Safe hunting. The radio went silent. The team pushed deeper into the mountain pass, moving with the practiced efficiency of operators who trusted their training and their equipment completely. The sun climbed higher, painting the peaks in shades of amber and shadow. He adjusted his pack, checked his GPS one more time, and moved forward. The survival pouch bounced lightly against his hip, forgotten. 12 hours later, everything would be gone except what was in that pouch. But in that moment, moving through the mountains with the best equipment and training the world could provide, disaster felt impossible. The narrow mountain pass seemed secure. The team moved in practiced formation, each operator covering sectors, every step calculated. Then the world exploded. It was perfectly coordinated, he says, his voice dropping. Multiple elevated positions. Heavy machine gun fire from 3 different angles. They were waiting for us. They knew we were coming. The distinctive ripping sound of PKM machine guns tore through the thin mountain air. Rounds impacted rock faces, sending fragments of stone slicing through the space where men had been standing seconds before. The ambush was textbook overlapping fields of fire, no escape route, designed to kill everything in the kill zone. He reached for his radio. White noise. Pure static screaming in his ear. Communications jammed instantly, cutting them off from air support, from headquarters, from the entire network that made modern operations possible. An RPG streaked down from above, the impact deafening, and the team's primary radio equipment simply ceased to exist in a burst of flame and shrapnel. The team leader's voice cut through the chaos, barely audible over gunfire. Break contact. Scatter and rally. It was the nightmare scenario every operator trains for but prays never come. Stay together and die in the ambush, or scatter and hope to survive long enough to regroup. There was no good choice. Only the choice that might keep some of them breathing. His M4 kicked against his shoulder as he laid down covering fire, the magazine depleting with terrifying speed. 30 rounds. Gone. Reload. Another 30. The math was brutal and simple, he was running out of ammunition faster than he was running out of enemies. Something exploded close enough to knock him sideways. The shockwave felt like a physical blow. When his vision cleared, his GPS unit hung from his vest by wires, the screen shattered, the electronics destroyed. His night vision system cracked straight through. Useless. Move. Move. Someone was shouting, maybe him, maybe another operator. The team scattered in different directions, breaking the ambush's killing geometry, each man racing for cover through terrain that offered almost none. He ran. Enemy fighters pursued, their voices echoing off rock faces, calling to each other in Pashto, coordinating the hunt. His equipment shed and broke with each desperate movement, vest straps tearing, gear bouncing loose, the sophisticated technology that had made him feel invincible now becoming dead weight that slowed him down. He fell hard during the escape, sliding down a rocky slope, his body slamming into stone. When he stopped, his secondary radio, his last link to teammates, to support, to anyone, lay in pieces on the rocks. The screen is dark. The circuits exposed. Completely destroyed. The shooting faded behind him. The voices of his teammates were gone. Radio silence wasn't tactical anymore. It was absolute. He was alone. He crouched in a crevice between rocks, his breathing ragged, and took inventory. His M4 empty, no spare magazines remaining. His GPS destroyed. His radios both gone. His night vision cracked and useless. His sophisticated equipment, the technological superiority he'd trusted completely, reduced to broken metal and shattered plastic. His hand found the survival pouch on his belt. Still there. Still intact. Inside, a knife, a fire starter, purification tablets, a signal mirror, and 50 feet of paracord. 5 primitive items that Mark had forced him to carry. 5 items he'd considered dead weight for years. Taliban fighters moved through the mountains above him, hunting. 72 hours from the nearest friendly forces. Alone in enemy territory. Those 5 items were all he had left. Everything modern, destroyed. Everything sophisticated, useless. Everything he trusted completely for years, reduced to broken metal and shattered plastic in a matter of minutes. And the only gear left functioning? The 5 primitive items he'd resented carrying. If you're thinking right now, my preparations are solid. My equipment won't fail. That could never happen to me, he thought exactly the same thing. Smash that like button if you want to see how these 5 ancient tools accomplished what cutting-edge military technology couldn't. And tell us in the comments, what's the one piece of equipment you trust your life to? Because over the next 72 hours of this story, you're going to discover why equipment trust almost killed him, while skill trust saved his life. Darkness fell over the Afghan mountains like a physical weight, and with it came the brutal comprehension of what had just happened. He crouched in his hiding position, hands shaking, not from fear yet, but from adrenaline crash, and tried to salvage something, anything, from his damaged equipment. The GPS unit was beyond repair, its screen a spiderweb of cracks, the circuitry exposed and dead. He tried the radios again, both of them, cycling through frequencies, adjusting antennas that were bent or missing entirely. Nothing. Just silence and static. The sophisticated encryption, the satellite connectivity, the instant global reach, all of it reduced to worthless electronic debris. He made his way to the pre-designated rally point, moving carefully through terrain that was trying to kill him even without enemy interference. He waited in the shadows, watching, listening for any sign of his teammates. Minutes stretched into an hour. Then 2. The mountains remained silent except for the wind and the distant sounds of Taliban fighters still searching the area. No one came. The decision settled over him like the cold, he was moving alone. 72 hours to the extraction point through mountains controlled by an enemy that knew every trail, every cave, every place a man might try to hide. He'd be moving through their territory, hunted, with no support and no communication. He opened the survival pouch and laid out what remained. The tactical knife. The ferro rod fire starter. The water purification tablets. The signal mirror. The paracord. 5 items that together cost less than his broken GPS unit. 5 items he'd carried for years while privately considering them relics from an obsolete era of warfare. The crushing irony wasn't lost on him. Every piece of sophisticated equipment had failed. The only functional gear he had left was the primitive survival kit he'd resented carrying. The temperature dropped as altitude and nightfall combined into something dangerous. He could feel it in his extremities first, fingers going numb, toes losing sensation. Hypothermia wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, incremental, deadly. He needed fire. He gathered dried grass and small twigs, used the knife to create wood shavings fine enough to catch a spark. The ferro rod came out of the pouch, and he scraped it with the knife's spine. Sparks showered onto the tinder bundle. Once. Twice. On the third scrape, the grass caught, a tiny ember glowing in the darkness. He nursed it carefully, adding material gradually, building the fire just large enough to survive but small enough to stay concealed in a rock crevice. The flame was barely bigger than his hand, hidden from sight, producing minimal smoke. But it was enough. The heat pushed back the hypothermia creeping through his body. Mark's voice echoed in his memory, clear as if the team sergeant was standing beside him. Fire is life. Master fire in all conditions. The night stretched ahead, long, freezing, filled with the sounds of enemy patrols moving through the mountains. He stayed awake, feeding the tiny fire, listening to every sound that carried through the thin air. The fire demanded constant attention, but it kept him breathing. Somewhere during those dark hours, a realization began forming that he couldn't push away anymore. Mark had seen this. Not this specific ambush, not this exact scenario, but the fundamental truth underneath it all. Technology fails, equipment breaks, and when everything modern stops working, you survive with what humans have always survived with. Maybe the old soldier training them in primitive skills hadn't been stuck in the past. Maybe he'd been the only one actually seeing the future clearly. First light came cold and gray. He moved through enemy territory with the signal mirror in his hand, using it to check blind corners before exposing himself, angling it to see around rock formations where ambushes waited. He marked his route with small stone cairns only he would recognize, primitive navigation for a primitive situation. The water source he found mid-morning looked like death, stagnant, discolored, probably contaminated with parasites and bacteria that would destroy him from the inside. Mark's voice cut through his exhaustion. Dehydration kills faster than hunger. He dropped 2 purification tablets into his canteen and waited the mandatory 30 minutes, forcing himself not to drink until the chemicals did their work. The water tasted like metal and iodine, but it kept him functional. The paracord became everything Mark promised it would be. He secured his remaining gear, strung noise traps around his hiding position using pebbles and stripped inner strands, fashioned an improvised lean-to shelter using the cord and his poncho. The blade never left his hand, cutting materials, carving steaks, processing the small amount of edible vegetation he could identify, preparing kindling for the night's fire. The Taliban patrol appeared without warning in the afternoon. He froze mid-movement, pressed against rock, barely breathing. 5 fighters passed within meters, their voices casual, their rifles slung. He remained motionless for 3 hours after they disappeared, every muscle locked, until he was certain they weren't doubling back. Day 2 brought exhaustion that lived in his bones. Every step up the mountain terrain felt like moving through concrete. The knife became a walking stick, carved from a fallen branch, the paracord wrapped around the grip for stability. His body was breaking down, but the primitive skills Mark had drilled into him kept functioning when nothing else would. That night's fire started faster. He had prepared char cloth during the day's rest periods, using fabric from his uniform and the ferro rod's heat. The ember caught immediately, the fire growing just large enough to ward off hypothermia. He was thinking differently now, not like a Green Beret with technological superiority, but like a primitive survivor where every calorie mattered, every movement had to serve multiple purposes, every skill was life or death. The paracord unraveled into fishing line he didn't have time to use, trap triggers for early warning systems, replacement bootlaces when his own failed, repairs to gear that was falling apart. Every technique he had mocked during training now proved absolutely essential. Day 3 started with enemy voices echoing off the valley walls. They'd spotted something, maybe his trail, maybe smoke from the night's fire. He moved fast, using every bit of stealth and primitive fieldcraft Mark had forced into his muscle memory. Stay low. Use terrain. Move like prey, not predator. The patrol aircraft appeared as a distant speck against the mountain sky. His hands shook as he pulled out the signal mirror, angling it desperately toward the aircraft, flashing crude SOS patterns. 3 short. 3 long. 3 short. Over and over, praying someone was watching, someone would see. The aircraft banked. Changed course. Started moving toward his position. He pushed toward friendly territory with reserves he didn't know he still had, every step bringing him closer to extraction, to safety, to survival. Mark's philosophy finally made complete, humbling sense in those final hours. Sophisticated equipment multiplies your capabilities, but primitive skills are the foundation everything else rests on. When the multiplier breaks, you better have an unbreakable foundation. The foundation had held. Barely. But it had held. He reached the extraction zone barely conscious, his body running on fumes and willpower that should have been exhausted days ago. When the helicopter appeared over the ridge, rotors beating against the thin mountain air, he couldn't stand anymore. He collapsed in the clearing, the survival pouch still on his belt, the 5 items inside having done exactly what Mark promised they would do. The medical evacuation was a blur of voices and hands checking vitals and 4 lines threading into his arm. The debriefing came later, after sleep that felt like death and waking that felt like resurrection. 2 other teammates had made it out. 3 others hadn't. The numbers sat heavy in his chest during recovery, a weight that had nothing to do with his injuries. I was transformed, he says now, his voice carrying the kind of certainty that only comes from surviving what should have killed you. From skeptic to absolute believer. Everything I thought I knew about operational capability, about what made a soldier effective, about what training mattered, it was all backwards. The humility crushed him during those recovery weeks. Mark had been right about everything. Every primitive skill he had dismissed, every technique he'd mocked, every hour of training he'd considered wasted, all of it had kept him breathing when the modern world stopped working. His arrogant dismissal of that training had almost killed him. Would have killed him, if Mark hadn't been too stubborn to accept his resistance. The after-action report he wrote emphasized fundamental survival skills with an urgency that bordered on desperation. He detailed every moment those 5 items saved his life, every primitive technique that proved essential, every assumption about modern warfare that the mountains had stripped away. True operational capability, he wrote, wasn't about having the best technology. It was about remaining capable when all technology failed. The question haunted him during sleepless nights: if he could teach only one skill to a new operator, what would it be? Not advanced tactics. Not weapons handling. Not technology integration. Fundamental survival skills, he says without hesitation. Because it doesn't matter how much sophisticated equipment you have if you can't survive when it all breaks. And in combat, eventually, everything breaks. His philosophy now, born from 72 hours in hell, was simple and absolute: modern equipment makes you more capable, but primitive skills keep you alive when capability isn't enough. The equipment multiplies your effectiveness. The skills ensure there's something left to multiply. He fingers the survival pouch as the sun sets behind him, the same pouch that hung on his belt in the Hindu Kush, the same 5 items inside that kept him breathing when nothing else would. I owe Mark my life, he says quietly. He saved me by forcing me to learn what I didn't want to know. By making me carry what I didn't want to carry. By being stubborn enough to teach lessons I was too arrogant to accept. He pauses, looking directly at the camera. The day I realized I was completely wrong was exactly the day those skills saved my life. Just like he promised it would be. The pouch sits between his hands, worn and stained, holding 5 simple items and 1 invaluable lesson. Sometimes the teacher you resist the most is teaching you the only thing that will keep you alive. He sets the survival pouch down carefully, his weathered hands resting on either side of it. The sun has disappeared completely now, leaving only the fading light that makes everything look like a memory. There are operators who trust their equipment, and there are operators who trust their skills, he says, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned understanding. The first type has advantages until the equipment fails. The second type survives. It's an uncomfortable truth about modern warfare that most people don't want to hear. Technology creates capability, but it also creates dependency. And dependency, in combat, becomes vulnerability. The more you rely on systems that can break, the more fragile you become when those systems inevitably do break. I feel a responsibility now, he continues, to pass on Mark's wisdom to new generations of operators. It's not optional anymore. It's a debt I owe to the man who saved my life by refusing to let me stay ignorant. The journey from Green Beret captain who mocked primitive training to someone who advocates for fundamental skill preservation wasn't just professional evolution. It was survival teaching humility, and humility teaching wisdom. He now gives every young operator the same mandate Mark gave him, with the same non-negotiable firmness. Carry those 5 items. Master those basic skills. Check them every single day. His eyes are intense, seeing past the camera to faces of soldiers who haven't learned this lesson yet. The day will come when they're all you have. Not might come. Will come. And when it does, you'll either be prepared or you'll be dead. But the lesson extends beyond soldiers and special operations. It reaches anyone who's built their life on systems they assume will always work, technology they assume will never fail, sophistication they assume equals security. Sophistication is fragile, he says. Real preparation should be based on what survives when everything else fails. Not what's most advanced. Not what's most capable. What survives? Survival, he's learned in the hardest way possible, isn't about having the newest gear or most advanced technology. It's about possessing fundamental skills that have kept humans alive for thousands of years. Skills that work when satellites fall silent and radios go dark. Skills that function in the Stone Age and the digital age and every age in between, because they're based on principles that don't change even when everything else does. He picks up the survival pouch one final time, holding it like the sacred object it became in those mountains. Mark taught me that being elite isn't about how well you operate with every advantage, he says quietly. It's about whether you can still operate when every advantage is gone. When the technology breaks. When the support disappears. When it's just you and the mountains and the fundamental question of whether you have what it takes to keep breathing. He looks directly at the camera, and there's something both haunting and grateful in his expression. I was wrong about him. Wrong about his training. Wrong about what mattered. And because he was stubborn enough to make me learn anyway, because he was wise enough to see what I couldn't, I got to come home alive. His voice drops to almost a whisper. Some teachers give you knowledge. Mark gave me survival. There's no higher gift a warrior can give another warrior than that. The pouch rests in his hands, worn and stained and worth more than all the sophisticated equipment he lost in those mountains. 5 simple items. 1 invaluable lesson. The difference between coming home and becoming another name on a memorial wall. His survival pouch sits on the table before us, worn, stained, holding 5 items worth less than $100 and one lesson that's absolutely priceless. So here's the question he would ask you right now, and we want you to answer honestly in the comments. If all your technology failed this instant, your phone, your navigation, your communication, everything modern you depend on, what fundamental skills do you possess that would actually keep you alive? Not gear you own. Not equipment you've bought. Skills you've mastered. Because as he learned in the worst possible way, sophistication is a borrowed capability that can be taken away, but primitive skills are owned capability that can never be stripped from you. If this story transformed how you think about real preparation versus false confidence, subscribe to this channel. We're bringing you more lessons from warriors who paid the ultimate tuition, survival itself, to learn what actually matters when everything goes wrong. Hit that like button if you now believe, as he does, that the oldest human skills might be the most critical ones our modern world is forgetting. Those 5 items cost less than dinner for 2. The skills to use them cost him 3 days in hell and nearly his life. But together, they're the difference between coming home and becoming a statistic. Don't wait for your own mountain crisis to teach you what he learned. Start building unbreakable skills right now.